let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast. I am your host, Eric Carrier. I'm here with my sidekick and co-host, Jessica Carrier. Jessica, you want to say hi?
Hey guys, welcome to the show.
This is episode 4. We have our first live interview today. We're going to be talking to JJ. JJ had a terrifying experience in the woods of Missouri about 11 years ago, and he's going to be sharing that with us today.
Before we get started, we'd like to thank everyone who has joined us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of our social media platforms.
Yes, we are grateful. Thank you guys for joining us.
We appreciate the support.
You can link to any of our social media accounts through our website, which is www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. We also want to give another shout out to RJ Jenkins, who has provided some artwork for this episode. RJ has agreed to continue to provide some artwork for us, and we are grateful for that.
Yes, we are.
We also want to remind you that if you have an experience that you would like to share, that we can be contacted through our website. We would also invite you that if you're enjoying the podcast and the content, that you would share the podcast with your friends and family. Now let's get to JJ. JJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are glad to have you here, and we appreciate your willingness to come and take part in this interview today.
Yes, this is so awesome.
Well, I hope it's beneficial or useful, however it falls.
So just to give you guys some background, JJ is actually a friend of mine from work, and he shared his experience with me probably about 6 months ago. I had gotten into a conversation at work about podcasts with another mutual friend that we both have, and we started talking about the different podcasts that we like. And I had mentioned that one of my favorite podcasts was Sasquatch Chronicles. And the other guy that I was talking to, he perked up and he said, "Hey, if you like Sasquatch stories, you need to talk to JJ." And I was like, "All right, I'll talk to JJ." And so a few days later, JJ was actually at my desk at work, and he says, "Hey, I heard you wanted to hear my story." And I was like, "Yes, I definitely want to hear your story." So after hearing his story, I was fascinated by it. It's really a great encounter. After hearing his story, I'm fairly certain it was likely a Sasquatch. If not, it was definitely something large, powerful, and without a question, very, very, very strange. JJ's experience was both violent and terrifying, and I felt like it needed to be shared. 6 months ago, this podcast wasn't even something that we were considering doing, so I actually introduced him to Sasquatch Chronicles in the hopes that he would contact them and share his story on their podcast. And at this point, I'm actually kind of glad that he didn't, because now that this podcast is up and going, I knew that I wanted JJ to be on our show, and I wanted him to be our very first guest interview. So thanks again for being on the show, and thanks for your willingness to share your experience with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the best thing to do, JJ, is just kind of start from the beginning and take us through your encounter.
Well, this experience happened about 11 years ago, actually 11 years ago last month. It was just at the junior end of my junior year of college. I was in a zoology class for my biology minor, and my college actually got selected to go down to southern Missouri to do a ichthyological study of fish, and some of the rivers down there that a lot of people go and they float and canoe on during the summer. The property that we ended up staying at down there was massive, several thousand acres in all directions, hardwoods, mature maples, oaks. It was absolutely gorgeous down there. It was tucked in between two very tall ridges that ran north to south. The valley stretched for miles. I mean, east to west. It was beautiful. There were no other buildings or people for, at least the better part of 45 minutes once we got off the main road in any direction. At that time, I was 21. Just turned 21. I'm not a small guy. I was a college football player, about 5'10", 230 pounds. And a teammate of mine was also in the same class. He was a big guy, if you will, 6'3", 260. He was a big defensive end. We both grew up hunting and fishing. We had a ton in common. Both played on the defensive side of the football. So we decided we'd bunk together on this trip, kind of, have somebody to talk to. It was going to be a 7-day study. To be more specific, we were about 25 miles southwest of Steelville, Missouri. I don't know if you guys know where that's at or not.
I do not. Is it north, central?
So if you're right at the boot heel and you go about 45 minutes west, you're probably 30 to 40 miles north of the Arkansas state line.
Okay.
When we arrived at the property, there was one main lodge that had the only bathroom and kitchen on the entire property. Spread out throughout the entire property were several cabins, and I say cabins loosely. They were more like your portable wood sheds, about 10 foot wide by 10 foot deep. They had 2 bunks in them. I don't even know. They were more like military racks that you'd see in a barracks. They weren't really like twin-sized beds. Each one had a window on one side and a door. The doors locked. They had those like little sliding bathroom locks, but nothing I would say secure. These cabins were in the base of the valley, so every cabin had 2 cinder blocks on every corner to kind of raise them up off the ground from when the rains came through and the valley got flooded as all the water was heading down to the river. The guy I was staying with, his name was Chris, and both of us being what we considered experienced outdoorsmen and big-time football players, at least that we thought at the time, decided we were going to stay at the farthest cabin away from the main lodge. I would say, just a rough guesstimate, we were somewhere between half a mile to 3/4 a mile away from the main lodge.
Okay.
Around night 3 or 4, Chris and I had been doing really good on the river, just kind of fishing after our study portion of the day was done. So we decided we were going to stay and keep fishing and having a good old boy time. I really couldn't tell you what time we got back to the cabin. I know it was late, probably after midnight sometime.
Okay.
We were just laying in our bunks, talking about fishing and football, what girls we were talking to, just, regular college guy stuff, what you talk about at 21 years old. And it got real quiet. And not just like quiet like nobody was talking, but all the birds stopped, all the crickets stopped, all the cicadas stopped. And it was noticeable, but we really didn't think anything of it. And we just kind of went about talking. And then a few minutes later, I heard the best way I can describe it is like a woof. Similar to the way a bear sounds.
Okay.
When you kind of get too close. I don't know if you've had any experience with bears, but both me and Chris being from Idaho, we've, had our experiences with bears, black bears especially, and they make this kind of go woof, woof kind of a sound. Just kind of a I see you, you're in my space, you need to get away. Okay. But this was much louder than any black bear I'd ever heard. I mean, it was very loud, very close. But one thing I vividly remember is, in my mind, I'm telling myself, well, there's black bears in Missouri, but this doesn't sound like a black bear. And one thing I also remember is we never heard jaw snapping, which is very indicative of bears after they do the wolf. They kind of clack their jaws together as like a warning, and just kind of to get away. We heard this over and over again. So we kind of talked about it between ourselves, and we're like, well, there's some people in the class that are probably just trying to pull a prank on us, pull a fast one, hee hee ha ha. We scared the big football players. So we kind of just brushed it off and didn't think anything of it. Then a few more minutes goes by, and I can only describe it as a bang. It was just the loudest noise that I had ever heard next to being next to a cannon. And this entire cabin shed just shook. I mean, the whole front to back, left to right, up, down, it moved. And I immediately jumped out of my bunk. And at this point, I'm standing in the middle of this 10 by 10 shed, and the entire cabin begins to shake back and forth, violently shaking back and forth. It was so much movement that it actually shook Chris out of his bunk and onto the floor. And like I said, Chris was bigger than I am, and it seemed like it went on forever. And now, in reality, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but it just felt like eternity that this thing was shaking. But it was never woofing at us again. It was never screaming or ground. Just the whole cabin was shaking. Okay. And when I say violent, it was violent enough that the 2x4 rafters that made up the rafter portion of this cabin, one actually snapped and fell to the floor. Wow. And the only thing that could go through my head was that whatever this thing is, it's going to come through the wall, and it's going to have us. And I grabbed a piece of this 2x4 rafter and just stood in the middle of the cabin, screaming my head off back at this thing. I mean, in my mind, you know, that fight or flight kicks in, and I'm going, we're gonna fight for our lives. Mm-hmm. There's nothing else that we're gonna have to do. Like I said, like I seen it went on forever. It went on long enough that my voice went hoarse. I couldn't even scream anymore. And then just as soon as it started, everything stopped. Wow. And everything went quiet. Just, I mean, eerily dead, silent. Again, no crickets, no cicadas, no birds, no anything. For the rest of this night, Chris never got off the floor. I mean, neither one of us slept at all, but he never moved a muscle off that floor. And all I did the rest of the night was stood in the middle of this cabin holding onto this 2x4. I mean, fingers cramping, forearms cramping. And I mean, in my mind, this thing was right outside, and it was still coming in. And the only thing that I could think is we just kept praying for sunlight. Please let the sun come up. Please let the sun come up. And finally, the sun came up. And, you know, you can call it fear, self-preservation. Like I said, we did not move. I sure as heck wasn't going out that door, and Chris wasn't even getting off the floor to go out the door. After a while, the sun had been up, I don't know, roughly 30, 40 minutes, I'd imagine. The door opened. And it was the property manager who ran this massive property and one of the professors from the class. So we walked out of the cabin, and I just vividly remember smelling this. Best way I could describe it, if you've ever been to a swamp or a lake after it's flooded, just putrid, rotty kind of a smell.
Okay.
And when we got out of the cabin, we saw that the cabin had been actually pushed off of the cinder block foundation onto the ground. The side that had the window on it had two very large mud marks, is the best way I could describe them, from the very top of where the roof and the wall connect, all the way down about 3 or 4 feet, probably within 2 feet of the bottom of this cabin. And I just as a rough guess, I would say somewhere between 10 to 12 inches across were these mud marks. The roof shingles, the two first rows of the roof shingles on that side had actually been ripped off the cabin and were laying on the ground.
Wow.
It looked like something had grabbed a hold of them and ripped them off, and they were laying on the ground. Now, with the cabin being as tall as it was, the shed and the cinder blocks, I would probably say that the roof line was every bit of 11 to 12 feet off of the ground. The property manager could clearly see that we were shaking. I mean, obviously these two giant college football players who thought they were kings of the world are, I mean, scared to death. And he just kind of chuckled and just nonchalantly goes, "Well, I guess you boys met Bruce." and there was a pause, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm not really sure who or what it is, but he don't seem to take kindly to people in this last cabin, especially men."
Thanks.
And I mean, I went from 0 to angry. And so I asked in like a very angry and shocked tone, "You mean to tell me this has happened before? Why didn't you warn us or anything?" And he just replies and goes, "Well, he hasn't been around in about a year or so." And that was it. That was the only explanation we got. He just kind of walks off. Our professor goes, "Are you guys okay?" And I'm just like, I'm alive. So, yeah, sure. That's great.
Heart attack, but alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Needless to say, we did not go back to that cabin. Me and Chris didn't stay in any cabin besides the main lodge. We stayed there for the rest of the trip. And like I said, I've been in the woods years before that. I continue to go into the woods now. I love to hunt and fish. I've never experienced anything like that before or since that time. I'm not saying that it was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or some very angry mountain spirit or something. But looking back on it, I really don't think it wanted to hurt us. I mean, with the power that whatever it was showed to do what it did to that cabin, if it wanted to come in, it could have easily come in. There's no doubt in my mind it could have ripped the door off, ripped the wall off, come through the ceiling, flipped it upside down, juggled it for all I know. It really feels like it wanted to scare us away from that part of the property. Like I said, I don't want to sit here and tell somebody what it was because I'm not even sure what exactly it was. But what I do know is what happened to me was extremely real. It completely changed how I behave in the woods. It completely changes how I travel when I know I'm going somewhere on a very massive property. Every time I step into the woods now, I carry some form of protection, whether it's a walking stick or a sidearm, or I take a dog with me, or something. And so for me to completely change my habits of something I've been doing my entire life was something that was extremely real to me.
Wow. Certainly fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you mind if we ask you a few additional questions?
Oh, absolutely.
So let's address the proverbial bear in the room. What do you think the chances are that this was a bear?
I have absolutely zero in my mind that this was a bear. I know that there are black bears in southern Missouri. The only thing in my mind that could be that big, maybe, would be some type of brown or grizzly bear, which we don't have in the Midwest. So in my mind, there's 0% chance that this was a bear.
We've been around bears before. We've seen bears in the woods, and black bears they don't really want anything to do with you. They just kind of, unless they're cornered, they're going to walk away.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've had a couple of encounters when we lived in North Carolina with black bear, and they're pretty skittish. They don't seem to really do the whole attacking thing. They may try to get in through a window or something like that, but they don't usually typically do any of the type of damage that you've kind of described that happened to this cabin. So the other thing I would say that kind of points out that it may not be a bear is that, you said the cabin was moving back and forth in all different directions. And as far as I'm aware, bears don't really have thumbs and can't really like pull things towards them. They can kind of rear back and push on things, but they're not really going to be able to pull on things in one direction and push on things in another direction.
The best way that I could describe it is if you've ever been a little kid and gone to the carnival and they have the House of Mirrors with the floor that raises up and down and goes back and forth. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it felt like.
Kind of like an earthquake almost.
Yes, yeah, almost exactly like an earthquake. I remember when the earthquake happened when I was in high school here in Central Illinois in the New Madrid Fault, but a lot more intense.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, you mentioned that you smelled something unusual. And can you describe the actual smell again?
The best way I can describe it is if you've ever been around a river or a backwater slough or a swamp, and you just get that putrid smell of something that's degrading, like when the foliage starts to degrade and break down, it just has a really pungent smell to it, is the best way that I can describe it. Which I felt very weird at the time because growing up in Central Illinois, I've been around these rivers and these backwater sloughs, and I've smelled that before with the rivers rising and falling. But down there in Missouri, they're all rock rivers. You don't get that kind of a smell. And it definitely wasn't there when we entered the cabin, but it was for sure there when we left.
Now, you also mentioned that it was kind of attacking on the side that had the window. Were you able to ever see anything through that window at all?
It was actually on the other side. It was the side that did not have the window.
Okay. So that would definitely not have given you the opportunity to get a visual on what was attacking the cabin.
That may have actually been a good thing.
I couldn't even tell you that I would have had the courage to even look out the window if it was on the window side.
I don't blame you, JJ. I don't know that I would have the courage to do that either.
I don't know if I'd have the courage to go into the woods ever again.
The wolf that you said you heard, was it deep? Was it reverberating? Could you feel it at all?
It was very deep. It was very loud. It really felt like you were standing next to a big bass drum in a marching band. When it happened, you could feel it in your chest. You felt it in your chest, and I had to have echoed. I would imagine it would have echoed. Nobody else at the camp ever said anything about it, but it was very loud, very deep, and like I said, you could feel it in your chest.
You're a guy of the woods. Have you ever heard anything out there at all that has ever sounded anything close to this?
Never. I had never heard anything before. Like I said, it resembled a bear when a bear does it, but not that loud, not that intense. And since then, that was 11 years ago, I've never heard anything remotely close to that. I still go down and deer hunt roughly an hour and a half west of where this occurred, and I still have not heard anything remotely close to that.
That's pretty brave to go back and deer hunt after this experience. To still want to be out there.
It took a little bit for me to decide to go back into the woods. Definitely a couple months before I was like, okay, yeah. But like I said, the more I thought about it, the more it just kind of, if it wanted to get us, it could have easily come through that cabin, and it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which, it kind of going back on the bear theme reminded me of a bluff charge. It really didn't want to hurt us or eat us, but it definitely didn't want us there.
Just seemed to want you out of the area.
Exactly.
So, what was the immediate conversation like between you and Chris after the event? Were you guys able to talk, or were you in too much shock?
We really didn't discuss it anymore on the trip. When we both came back to school that next fall for our senior year, I was like, "Hey, man, do you even have any idea what happened?" And he just looked at me and goes, "I really try not to think about it." Yeah. And we both couldn't put a finger on it. We've discussed it a few times about what we think it is, what we thought it was, and it was just we don't know what it was, but we just never could put a finger on what it could be.
Right. How has this affected your guys' relationship? Are you guys still friends, or have you guys drifted off throughout the years?
We're still friends. We still have each other's number. We still, hey, happy birthday. Hey, are you coming to homecoming? I'm one of the select few people that does not have social media. So we don't keep in contact via Facebook like everybody else does these days. Mm-hmm. But we do still occasionally talk. I'd probably say at least 2 or 3 times a year. Every now and again, if I'm heading out west to do an elk hunt or something, I'll call him up, ask him what he's doing, if he's around. And I actually saw him last year. He came to Illinois for a whitetail hunt. We met up and had lunch together. And I was still like, man, I can't believe those college years. And he goes, yeah, there were some crazy times. I was like, so you ever been to Missouri? To this day, he's not gone back to Missouri.
Okay, I can get that. How
about you? Have you ever been back to the site or to the location?
Not to that specific site, but like I said, I do go back to Missouri every year. I actually lived in Missouri for 6 years after this happened, and I'm actually going back roughly within an hour next month. We're actually going to go down and do a float trip. Some friends of mine and my wife are. So,
same river?
Not the same river, but one that's probably within 60 miles or so of where we were at.
You had mentioned the prints or the marks that were on the side of the cabin. Did they have any appearance of being hands or fingers or anything like that?
Nothing distinctive that I could see, other than the fact that the 2 to 3 rows of shingles had been clearly ripped off. It wasn't. You've seen storm damage where 1 or 2 shingles will get ripped off, but these were entire rows. From front to back, the entire row had been ripped off and thrown on the ground.
That's not easy to do.
No, that takes some power. There's no doubt about it. You spent the next few days in the in the lodge, you said, did the property manager ever get into any other further details or discussions about Bruce or any of these other incidents that happened there?
Nothing in depth. Obviously, he'd look at us and just kind of smile or chuckle or whatever. I mean, he thought it was apparently hysterical. But the only other thing he said is, he goes, usually we don't have any issues in the summer. He said anytime we've ever had issues there have been in the late spring or very early summer. So we were the first group of, I guess there were several colleges, groups that were coming down to study the fish of this river as the floating season progressed, to see how the populations changed or if they moved or anything like that. And we were the very first group.
Okay.
And he goes, usually the first groups that are down here are really small and nobody ever goes to that last cabin.
Do you recall how many people were in your group?
Not including the professors. I believe there was 15 of us.
And did anyone else in the group report any strange activities while they were there?
They never did. And if any of them ever heard anything, they never admitted to it.
How have people reacted over the years as you've shared your story?
To be honest with you, I really don't share it a whole lot. People tend to fall into one or two categories. Either A, you're crazy and you're making everything up, or B, yes, you shook hands with a Sasquatch. And I can't say that that's what happened, because I didn't see it. I mean, I lived it, but I never saw anything that would tell me for sure that this was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. But yeah, I don't tell a whole lot of people. I think this is by far the biggest platform I've ever shared this story on. Usually it's a campfire, or we're sitting around having a cold beer telling hunting stories, and someone be like, "Oh man, you got to tell them that time you were in Missouri." And then I'll regale them with the story. And like I said, people fall into one or two groups. Either, no, this is a wise tale, or, yep, you met Bigfoot.
Right.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us, even though it is such a large platform. It's made our day, our week, our year, whatever. We love it.
Yeah, we appreciate you telling the story, and I think our listeners will really appreciate it as well. Prior to this encounter, did you have any beliefs or ideas about Sasquatch or anything?
Frankly, before this happened, I was a big skeptic. Being in the classes that I am, and being in the outdoorsman that I am, I had no doubt in my mind that at some point there was probably some form of bipedal ape that roamed across North America somewhere in the fossil record. But in my mind, with as many people that go hiking and four-wheeling and camping and hunting and fishing, if there was a creature out there, there would be a lot more physical evidence, video evidence, some type of body or something. So definitely before this, I was like, no, there's no such thing as a Bigfoot. Or if there was, it's no longer around.
Now, what are your thoughts regarding Bigfoot?
Well, every time I step into the woods, I have some form of protection. So there's something out there that science has yet to prove is here. So I would say I'm no longer a skeptic, but a cautious believer. If that makes any sense. So there's something out there, but I'm not going to stand up and say this is exactly what it is.
Right.
I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah, not having an actual visual experience makes that tough, but this certainly is indicative of a lot of Sasquatch behavior and a lot of stories that other people have told regarding Sasquatch encounters. Did this affect you in any other way? Did you have bad dreams or nightmares or anything like that?
Not really. Nightmares. I mean, for the rest of the trip, I personally really didn't sleep hardly at all. But not really any nightmares, but definitely when I'm out in the woods, or even just walking the dog around the block and I hear a noise, I definitely think twice about what it is. Being outside and being in the woods, even if we're just mushroom hunting in the springtime, and you hear a twig snap. Before, I've been like, nah, it's a squirrel. Now I verify that it's a squirrel. Right. I don't just brush it. I just don't brush anything off.
Well, JJ, it's a fantastic story, and we certainly appreciate you being on the show and sharing it with us. It's great. I really love it. The first time I heard it, I was just like, oh, this needs to be on the show.
I'm glad somebody's interested in it, honestly. I don't know if you've had any experiences with, a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or whatever it is. Like you said, you've experienced bears before, and as have I, and I just can't, in my mind, make it out to be a bear.
Yeah, no. Based on our experiences with bear, I would say what you experienced was absolutely not a bear. And if it was a bear, it was a absolutely massive bear that is, again, not known to science or man.
And being in that class and then studying things, one of the other thoughts that did cross my mind was, could whatever this be migrating through the area? Could it be following some type of food source? If, the property manager said that this thing, Bruce, whatever it is, they only have issues with it in the late spring to early summer. And usually at that time, they don't have a whole lot of people at the end of the property. But in the middle of summer and into the fall, they don't have any issues.
Right.
And he did say that they had a harder time with men. And I think maybe the fact that you and your roommate were kind of, some big men out there, that it might have been more of a threat type situation. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know what they think.
I mean, it would make sense, a territorial stance, I guess, if you will. I would say that would lead me to believe that it is some type of physical creature, animal, not just some mountain voodoo spirit, if you will. If it's going to, perceive people in my territory as a threat, and especially men, as more of a territorial dominance display.
Yeah, bringing up the idea that this thing was just kind of wandering through the area at certain times a year. I think that's also pretty indicative of a lot of Sasquatch encounters as well, where people tend to only see them on their property or at other locations certain times a year. So I think that does give some precedence to the fact that they may be a migratory creature, and they may kind of wander from area to area, dependent upon food sources or other sources that they might need.
Well, for anybody who's never been down into that part of the country, into that part of Missouri or northern Arkansas, like I said, I go there pretty regularly, 2 or 3 times a year. You can get lost down there. I mean, there's not buildings or people for miles and miles in every direction. And, when it's not summertime and people aren't on the river, there's not a whole lot of activity down there.
Right. Pretty dead outside of their peak seasons. Is that what you're saying? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, the Mark Twain National Forest is just a hop, skip, and a jump to the west. And, I mean, you're talking over 1 million square acres. That's where me and my family go deer hunting. And where our deer camp is set at, we're 5 miles away from the nearest camp, and we're 28 miles away one direction from the nearest town.
Wow. That's definitely in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, JJ, we appreciate it again. Thanks for being on the show. If you have any other future encounters, please look us up and share them with us.
No, absolutely. I was glad you were interested. I really enjoy the platform, and if I have any experiences, you will be by far the first to know once I calm down enough to make a phone call.
Yes.
All right, sir. You take care.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. That's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And remember, if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, please email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com or visit our website at prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.